Listener discretion is advised. This episode contains detailed descriptions of violent crime, murder, and sexual violence. We approach these stories with the gravity and respect the victims deserve. This content is intended for mature audiences only. It is a warm Sunday afternoon in July 1974. You are at Lake Sammamish State Park, east of Seattle. Thousands of people have spread out across the grass, families with coolers, teenagers throwing frisbees, couples lying in the sun. The air smells like sunscreen and barbecue smoke. It feels completely safe. It is the kind of day where nothing bad could possibly happen. A young man approaches you. He is handsome, disarmingly so. His arm is in a sling, and he is struggling with a load of sailing equipment. He smiles at you, a wide, easy smile, and asks if you could help him carry it to his boat. He is charming and funny and a little helpless. You say yes. Of course you say yes. You are a good person, and he seems like a good person, and it is a beautiful summer day. His name is Ted. He introduces himself simply as Ted. He drives a tan Volkswagen Beetle, and you will never be seen alive again. His full name is Theodore Robert Bundy, and this is his story. They seem ordinary. They hold jobs, have families, smile at their neighbors. But underneath that mask of normalcy lies a capacity for violence most of us will never understand. Each week, we go inside the minds of the world's most notorious serial killers, exploring not just what they did, but why. I'm Ben, and this is Dark Whispers, Serial Killers, Ted Bundy. The name alone carries weight. Decades after his execution, he remains the cultural archetype of the American serial killer. Educated, charming, handsome, utterly without conscience. But the legend has a way of swallowing the truth. Today we are going to strip that legend back. We are going to look at the real man, where he came from, what he did, and who he took from this world. Because this story is not really about Ted Bundy. It is about the women and girls he murdered, and we owe them more than a myth. Theodore Robert Cowell was born on the 24th of November 1946 at the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers in Burlington, Vermont. His mother was Eleanor Louise Cowell. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and living in a deeply conservative era that treated unmarried mothers with open contempt. She could not raise her child alone, so Ted went to live with her parents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, in Philadelphia. And here is where the first lie began. Ted grew up believing that his grandparents were his parents. He was told that Eleanor, his mother, was his sister. The reason for this deception remains debated. Some accounts suggest it was to protect Eleanor from social shame. Others hint that the true identity of Ted's biological father was itself a source of family scandal. What is certain is that Ted Bundy spent the most formative years of his life inside a lie. His grandfather, Samuel Cowell, was a figure of profound violence. Neighbors and family members described him as a man of volcanic temper, a tyrant who beat his wife and terrorized those around him. He reportedly swung cats by their tails and beat the family dog without provocation. He once threw Eleanor's sister down a flight of stairs because she overslept. He collected hardcore pornographic magazines and kept a substantial collection hidden around the house. This was the man Ted Bundy called father for the first years of his life. There is a story that has been repeated across many accounts of Bundy's childhood. His Aunt Julia woke one morning to find herself surrounded by knives. Arranged around her sleeping body in the bed were kitchen knives, all pointing toward her. Ted, aged around 3, stood at the edge of the bed, smiling. It is impossible to verify this story in every detail, but Julia herself described it. Whatever it tells us about the very young Ted Cowell, it lodges in the memory. In 1951, Eleanor Cowell moved with her young son to Tacoma, Washington. She married a man named Johnny Bundy, a hospital cook, and Ted took his stepfather's surname. By all accounts, Johnny Bundy was a decent, ordinary man who tried to connect with his stepson. Ted was indifferent to him. He described Johnny with barely concealed contempt in later interviews, dismissing him as boring and beneath him. The charming mask was already forming, and beneath it, a profound sense of superiority was taking root. The warning signs accumulated. Neighbors reported that Ted was caught peering into the windows of homes after dark, a voyeuristic compulsion that began before he was a teenager. He shoplifted with casual ease and no apparent guilt. He became fascinated with detective magazines, the kind that described crimes in lurid detail, many of them featuring images of bound or assaulted women. He was not diagnosed with anything, not flagged by any system. He was, to the world, simply a quiet, well-mannered boy. He had learned very early that the performance of normality was its own kind of power. In high school, Ted was likable and reasonably popular. He was not a loner. He was not obviously strange. He ran for office. He smiled. He learned to read rooms and mirror people back to themselves. He worked briefly as a bag boy, as a delivery man, in a series of ordinary jobs where he left behind ordinary impressions. Nothing alarming. Nothing that stood out. What was missing, what had perhaps never been present, was any genuine emotional connection to the people around him. He was, in the language of later psychiatric evaluation, learning to fake what other people felt naturally. He was becoming fluent in a language that was not his own. He attended the University of Washington briefly, then transferred, then drifted. He worked on Nelson Rockefeller's presidential campaign in 1968. He answered phones at a suicide prevention hotline, listening to the desperate and the frightened, performing empathy with professional ease. His supervisor at the hotline later described him as compassionate and effective. She wrote him glowing references. The mask was, by then, essentially perfect. At the University of Washington in Seattle, Ted Bundy met a woman who would define the next decade of his psychology. Her name was Stephanie Brooks. She was from a wealthy California family, beautiful, sophisticated, and everything that Ted, with his working-class background and uncertain origins, felt he was not. They fell deeply in love, or at least Ted experienced something that functioned like love. Stephanie was the first person he had ever met who seemed to represent the life he believed he deserved. The relationship lasted several years. And then, in 1968, Stephanie ended it. She felt Ted lacked direction and ambition. She was finishing her degree, looking toward a future, and Ted seemed to her like a man who was going nowhere. She broke it off cleanly and moved back to California. The effect on Bundy was catastrophic and revealing. He did not grieve in the way most people grieve. He did not move through loss toward acceptance. Instead, he collapsed inward, dropped out of university, drifted through a series of directionless jobs, and fell into what appeared to be a prolonged depression. But the nature of that depression is important. He was not mourning Stephanie as a person. He was mourning what she represented, his access to status, to validation, to the life he felt owed to him. She had rejected him, and that rejection felt like an exposure. Like someone had seen through the performance. What happened next is one of the most psychologically revealing episodes in the Bundy story. Over the following years, Ted Bundy systematically reinvented himself. He went back to university. He found a purpose in Republican politics, working on campaigns and building connections. He became, by external measures, impressive, articulate, someone going somewhere. And then, when he had built himself into the version of himself he believed Stephanie had wanted, he tracked her down and resumed the relationship. She was surprised. She was charmed. She agreed to see him again, and they rekindled what she believed was a genuine romance. There was talk of marriage. And then Ted Bundy ended it. Coldly, deliberately, without warning or explanation. A phone call. Done. He discarded her the moment the conquest was complete. This was not heartbreak enacted as revenge, though it certainly functioned that way. What it revealed was something far more disturbing. Stephanie had never been a person to him. She had been an object, a symbol, whose value lay entirely in what possessing her said about him. When she was no longer a challenge, she ceased to exist in any meaningful way. He had felt nothing on his way out that he had not chosen to perform. And that incapacity for genuine emotional connection, that profound and total absence of empathy, was not just a personality flaw. It was the engine of everything that came next. Because by the time Ted Bundy coldly hung up the phone on Stephanie Brooks, women had already started to disappear. 1974 began like any other year in Seattle. But something was moving through the Pacific Northwest, and it left silence in its wake. In January, a young woman named Joni Lentz was attacked in her basement bedroom in the University District of Seattle. She was beaten savagely with a metal rod while she slept. She survived, but she would suffer permanent brain damage. She is often counted among Bundy's earliest known victims in Washington, though he was never formally charged for the attack on her. On the 1st of February 1974, Linda Ann Healy vanished from her basement bedroom near the University of Washington campus. She was 21 years old, a student, a skier, a young woman with a full life ahead of her. Her bedsheets were stained with blood. Her nightgown was found hanging in the closet. She was simply gone. On the 19th of March, Donna Gail Manson, 19 years old, left her dormitory at Evergreen State College to attend a jazz concert on campus. She never arrived. She was never found. On the 17th of April, Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18, disappeared from the campus of Central Washington State College after leaving a meeting. Gone. On the 6th of May, Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22 years old, left her dormitory at Oregon State University late in the evening. She was never seen again. On the 1st of June, Brenda Carol Ball, 22, was last seen leaving the Flame Tavern in Burien, Washington. Gone. On the 17th of June, Georgian Hawkins, 18 years old, walked the short distance between a friend's fraternity house and her own sorority house, a route she had walked dozens of times, lit and familiar, and vanished. She was never found. 7 women, 7 lives ended or destroyed, and the Pacific Northwest was just beginning to understand that something was very wrong. Then came Lake Sammamish. The day I described to you at the beginning of this story. On the 14th of July, 1974, at Lake Sammamish State Park, a man calling himself Ted approached multiple women at the park. Several declined his request for help. 2 did not. Janice Ann Ott was 23 years old. She was a probation caseworker, a newlywed, someone described by everyone who knew her as warm and generous. She left with the man called Ted. Her body was found months later on Taylor Mountain. Denise Marie Naslund was 18 years old. She disappeared from the same park later that same afternoon. Her remains were found alongside Janice Ott's. What made Lake Sammamish different, what finally forced the pieces toward a shape, was the sheer number of witnesses. Over 100 people had seen the man called Ted that day. Composite sketches were published in newspapers across Washington. The sketches showed a clean-cut, handsome young man, an attractive man. People who saw the image often remarked on it, that he didn't look like what a killer was supposed to look like. But there is no such look. That was a lesson the Pacific Northwest was learning the hard way. 12,000 tips flooded in. A name appeared on 3 separate tip lines, Ted Bundy. It was investigated and set aside. He was a law student, a volunteer with a crisis hotline, a young Republican with connections to the governor's office. He did not fit the profile investigators had constructed in their minds. He had never fit. That was the point. That was, in fact, the whole strategy. Not just a lucky accident of genetics and grooming, but a deliberate and sustained performance, built over a lifetime, designed to ensure that people would always find a reason to look somewhere else. In the autumn of 1974, the disappearances in Washington stopped. Ted Bundy had been accepted to the University of Utah School of Law. He packed up his tan Volkswagen and drove east to Salt Lake City. He brought his compulsion with him. On the 2nd of October, Nancy Wilcox, 16 years old, vanished near Holiday, Utah. On the 18th of October, Melissa Ann Smith, 17, the daughter of the Midvale police chief, disappeared after leaving a pizza parlor. She was found 9 days later in the mountains, murdered. On the 31st of October, Laura Ann Ain, 17, vanished after a Halloween party. Her body was found on Thanksgiving Day in a Utah canyon. And then came the night that almost ended Ted Bundy's killing. On the 8th of November 1974, a young woman named Carol DeRonk was approached at the Fashion Place Mall in Murray, Utah. A man identifying himself as Officer Roseland told her that someone had attempted to break into her car. He asked her to come with him to the police station to file a report. He was authoritative, plausible. She got into his car, a tan Volkswagen Beetle. Within minutes, she knew something was wrong. The car did not head toward a police station. It moved in the wrong direction. The man beside her seemed different now, the professional authority dropping away, something else rising in its place. She could feel the change in the air of that small car. He pulled over onto a quiet street and snapped a handcuff onto her wrist. She panicked. She struggled. He fumbled with the second cuff, and in his agitation fastened both loops to the same wrist, a critical mistake. Carol DeRonch did not freeze. She fought. When he raised a crowbar above her head, she threw herself sideways and shoved it away. When he produced a pistol, she had already found the door handle. She screamed and threw herself out of the slowly moving car, landing hard on the road, and scrambled to her feet. The man drove away. Carol DeRonch ran into the night and flagged down a passing couple who drove her to the police. She was alive. And she had seen his face. She would remember it. That same evening, Deborah Jean Kent, 17 years old, left the auditorium of Viewmont High School in Bountiful, Utah during a school play. She was never seen again. A handcuff key was found in the parking lot. It was a match for the cuffs placed on Carol DeRonch. Bundy then turned his attention to Colorado. In January of 1975, Karen Eileen Campbell, 23, disappeared from the corridor of the Wildwood Inn in Snowmass Village. Her body was found weeks later. Julie Cunningham, 26, vanished in Vail in March. Denise Lynn Oliverson, 25, disappeared in Grand Junction in April. Melanie Cooley, 18, was found murdered near Nederland. Shelley K. Robertson, 24, was found at the bottom of a mine shaft. Throughout this entire period, a woman in Seattle was watching the news and feeling a cold, creeping dread. Her name was Elizabeth Klepfer, and she had been Ted Bundy's girlfriend for years. She had called the King County tip line more than once to report her suspicions. She had been told, gently, that her boyfriend did not fit the profile. She kept calling. Nobody believed her. She barely believed herself. She was right. The arrest came not from detective work, but from a traffic stop. In the early hours of the 16th of August, 1975, Utah Highway Patrol Sergeant Bob Hayward noticed a tan Volkswagen Beetle idling in his neighborhood in Granger, an area that had seen several recent burglaries. Hayward ran the plates. The car was registered to a Theodore Robert Bundy. He switched on his lights. Bundy ran. Hayward pursued. Bundy eventually pulled over in a gas station parking lot. What Sergeant Hayward found in the car was not a burglary kit. He found a ski mask, rope, an ice pick, handcuffs, and strips of torn sheet. Bundy claimed they were camping supplies. Hayward arrested him on suspicion of burglary. Investigators began connecting the evidence. Carol DeRonch was brought in for a lineup. She walked along the row of men, stopped, and without hesitation identified Ted Bundy. He was convicted of aggravated kidnapping and sentenced to 1 to 15 years in Utah State Prison. Colorado moved swiftly to extradite him on suspicion of the murder of Karen Campbell. He was transferred to Aspen to await trial. Ted Bundy did not intend to wait. On the 7th of June, 1977, Bundy was taken to the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen to review law materials in the court library. Security was not what it should have been. During a recess, Bundy walked to a second-floor window, forced it open, and jumped. He twisted his ankle on landing but kept moving. He walked into the mountains above Aspen. He stole food from cabins. He hiked for 6 days in the Colorado wilderness. He made it to Aspen Mountain before exposure, hunger, and disorientation brought him down. He stole a car and was found erratically driving it by 2 sheriff's deputies. He was returned to custody, but the escape had given him something. It had told him he could do it. He began planning the second attempt immediately. He obtained a hacksaw blade. Over months, he used it to slowly cut a small opening in the steel plate above his cell. He also stopped eating. Systematically. Deliberately. Over weeks and months, he lost 35 pounds, enough to slip his thinner body through the gap in the ceiling. On the 30th of December, 1977, while most of the jail was distracted by a holiday party, Bundy crawled through the ceiling of his cell, navigated through the space above the building, and dropped down into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was, fortunately, out for the evening. He changed into street clothes he found there, walked out the front door, and disappeared into the night. It was 17 hours before anyone noticed he was gone. He drove a stolen car to Denver, boarded a flight to Chicago, then took a train to Ann Arbor, Michigan. He stole another car. He kept moving. By mid-January of 1978, he had reached Tallahassee, Florida, where he rented a room under the name Chris Hagen, near the campus of Florida State University. Ted Bundy was free. And whatever restraint had governed the timing of his violence before, it was gone now. In the weeks that followed, what happened in Tallahassee was the concentrated expression of everything he was. He arrived in Tallahassee on the 8th of January 1978. He was 31 years old, penniless, and living under a false name. Within a week, whatever was left of his control collapsed entirely. In the early hours of the 15th of January, he entered the Chi Omega sorority house on the Florida State University campus. It was just past 3 in the morning. The house was quiet. The doors were not adequately secured. What happened inside that house in the next 30 minutes was an act of savagery that shocked even investigators hardened by violent crime. He moved through the building in darkness. In that brief window of time, 4 young women were attacked. 2 of them did not survive. Margaret Elizabeth Bowman was 21 years old, a junior studying art history. Lisa Levy was 20 years old, a junior from St. Petersburg. Both were killed in their rooms that night. 2 other women in the house, Karen Chandler and Kathy Kleiner, were severely beaten and survived, though both suffered significant injuries. That same night, within the hour, Bundy attacked another young woman named Cheryl Thomas at her apartment less than a mile away. She survived, but suffered a fractured skull, a dislocated shoulder, and permanent hearing loss in one ear. 5 women attacked in a single night. 2 lives ended. 3 women left with injuries and trauma that would shape the rest of their lives. The campus erupted in terror the following morning. Law enforcement flooded the area. And still, Ted Bundy was not caught. He stole a van. He drove around Florida. He committed petty theft. He shoplifted food. He was a fugitive running on nothing but instinct and desperation, and he was still killing. On the 8th of February 1978, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach left her classroom at Lake City Junior High School in Lake City, Florida, to retrieve her purse from her homeroom. She was seen getting into a van in the school parking lot. A witness described the driver as a dark-haired man. Kimberly Leach was never seen alive again. Her body was found weeks later in a state park. She was 12 years old. Kimberly Leach was the youngest known victim of Ted Bundy, and she was the last. 7 days after Kimberly Leach disappeared, Ted Bundy's time finally ran out. In the early morning hours of the 15th of February 1978, Pensacola police officer David Lee noticed an orange Volkswagen Beetle, reported stolen, moving slowly through a residential neighborhood. He initiated a traffic stop. The driver identified himself as Kenneth Misner. Officer Lee called in the name and ran it through the system. Bundy bolted. He ran on foot into the darkness. Officer Lee chased him, caught him, and wrestled him to the ground. Even in those final moments, Bundy fought back. It took considerable effort to get him into handcuffs. When the identification came back as Theodore Robert Bundy, wanted in 3 states, suspect in the murders of dozens of women, Officer David Lee reportedly said that Bundy told him that night, "I wish you had killed me." The nation reacted with a mixture of relief and horror. Here was the face they had been searching for. Charming, handsome, educated, utterly ordinary. He confirmed everything people had been told to fear and simultaneously shattered every assumption about what a killer was supposed to look like. Ted Bundy was charged, extradited to Florida, and placed on trial for the Chi Omega murders in the summer of 1979. He chose, characteristically, to represent himself. What followed was one of the most bizarre courtroom spectacles in American legal history. Bundy treated the trial as theater. He cross-examined witnesses with practiced authority. He charmed reporters and members of the public gallery. He received fan mail by the sackload. Women wrote him love letters. He received marriage proposals. The courtroom had become his stage, and he played it with the same calculated performance he had always used to move through the world. But the evidence was overwhelming. Forensic odontologist Dr. Richard Souviron presented the jury with what became the defining piece of evidence in the case. A bite mark found on Lisa Levy's body matched, with near certainty, the irregular dental pattern of Ted Bundy's teeth. Bundy had fought vigorously against providing dental impressions. He understood what they would show. He was right. On the 24th of July, 1979, the jury returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death by electrocution. In words that have since become among the most quoted in the history of American criminal justice, the judge looked at Bundy and said, "It is an utter tragedy for this court. You're a bright young man. You'd have made a good lawyer. I'd have loved to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself." Bundy was subsequently tried and convicted for the murder of Kimberly Leach. A second death sentence was handed down. He spent nearly a decade on death row. He gave interviews. He wrote letters. He manipulated journalists and investigators with strategic confessions, offering details of murders as bargaining chips in exchange for execution delays. In the final days before his scheduled execution, he met repeatedly with Detective Robert Keppel and FBI profiler William Hagmaier, confirming murders and providing details he hoped would buy him more time. He confessed to 30 murders across 7 states. Investigators believe the true number is almost certainly higher. Some estimates place it at over 100. We will never know with certainty because Ted Bundy took those answers with him. On the morning of the 24th of January, 1989, outside the Florida State Prison in Stark, a crowd had gathered. This was not a candlelight vigil. People cheered. They lit fireworks. They held signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn, and Tuesday is Friday." When the word came that the execution was complete at 7:16 in the morning, the crowd erupted. Inside, Ted Bundy had eaten a final meal of steak and eggs that he declined to touch. When asked if he had any last words, he said only, "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." He was 42 years old. What did the case of Ted Bundy teach us? It taught law enforcement that charm is not innocence, that composure is not conscience. It accelerated the development of criminal profiling in America, and it forced a reckoning with the dangerous assumptions society makes about who is capable of violence. It also made clear how easily a handsome face and a confident manner could move a suspect down the list of priorities, even when the evidence pointed directly at him. But above all else, the Ted Bundy case is a story about the people he took. About Linda Ann Healy, who loved to ski and sang on the radio. About Georgian Hawkins, who was walking a lit path she had walked 100 times. About Janice Ott, who said yes to a stranger because she was a kind person in a world that should be safe. About Carol Dalronche, who fought back with everything she had and survived. About Lisa Levy and Margaret Bowman and Kimberly Leach, 12 years old, taken from a school hallway on an ordinary Tuesday morning. These are the names that matter, not his. I'm Ben. Thank you for listening to Dark Whispers, Serial Killers. New episodes every week. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and remember, the scariest monsters are the ones you never suspect.